Good morning and welcome to Radio Now's Urgent Conversations, coming to you live from Channels Television Amphitheatre in Lagos. To introduce this program properly, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Onyekachi Onobugu, board member, Radio Now 95.3 FM. Dr. Onobugu, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Kaleria, and thank you to all our viewers and listeners for following us on this. To start this program, as a ladies and gentlemen and special guests, panelists, distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have all of you at this second conversation organized by Radio Now that is focused on discussing another topical issue that besets our great nation. The Webster Dictionary defines insecurity as uncertainty or anxiety about oneself, lack of confidence, or just the state of being in danger or threat. These definitions kind of mirror what most Nigerians feel today. Let me start my brief note by quoting from a paper I read in the Journal of Sustainable Development. It states, and I quote, "Security is a concept that is prior to the state, and the state exists in order to provide that concept. Security is the prime responsibility of the state." The 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria specifically states that the security and welfare of the people shall be the primary purpose of government. Therefore, when insecurity or discourse around insecurity pervades in society, then the leaders of that society must be held accountable in ensuring that they deliver the prime role for which they are in existence. Unfortunately, governments at all levels seem to be failing the citizenry on this constitutional responsibility, and it seems to be failing to provide a secured and safe environment for lives, properties, and the conduct of business and economic activities. From the issues of banditry in the Northwest, to the IPOB and secessionist agitations in the Southeast, to the constant killings and the new word we see here around unknown gunmen in the Middle Belt, to the attacks on government infrastructure like the trains in Kaduna. These portend insecurity. Amnesty International in its December 2020 statement stated, and I quote, "Insecurity in the field, as well as policies and practices by the Nigerian government and security forces, have made reporting accurate numbers extremely difficult, and the impacted regions of both conflicts overlap. But estimates that Nigeria is now home to over 2 million internally displaced people, and the probable cost of lives is appalling. In August last year, they estimated over 1,000 people had been killed as a result of communal violence, banditry, and the failure of what they say is Nigerian forces to live up to their responsibilities. These recurrent issues and statements by international partners have created the perception that Nigeria is beset with uncontrollable insecurity challenges. These perceptions sometimes are based on reality and others based on perception. Either way, they have a damaging impact on the psyche of Nigerians. But more importantly, it creates the perception that businesses cannot thrive in Nigeria. This in turn discourages investors and generally dampens the positive energy and spirit we Nigerians are known for amidst the perceived deterioration in security in this country. Nigeria is also confronted with development challenges which pose serious threats to our economic development. I often use the word perceived because it's to highlight the disjoint between what the man on the street perceives about insecurity and what our officials say. Like in all things, perception is one's reality. However, data we have from the Global Terrorism Index indicate that Nigeria so far is number 3 in terrorism, and we are just above some war-torn countries. To tackle insecurity head-on and the issues around this, Real Now, in its urgent conversations, has put together this event titled Strategies for Solving Insecurity in Nigeria. Our goal is to provide really a platform to discuss openly and frankly the security challenges we face, but more importantly, understand what the government is doing to address same and what they expect from us, the citizens. This second conversation in the Radio Now Urgent Conversation series will be focused on solving the insecurity challenges we have. And we are honored to have someone that has served in various theaters of war and continues to serve our nation in the highest echelon in the security apparatus of Nigeria, in the person of our Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Irabo, as one who will help us expose what we are doing. Radio Now, for those of you who don't know, 95.3 is a public service media company focused on delivering factual, nuanced, and balanced Nigerian-focused programming. We exist to hold power accountable and help you better be informed and involved as citizens. Truth is our currency, and we go beyond the news. In closing, I want to once again thank our guests, panelists, sponsors for making time to join us today. The Radio Now series is supported by Open Society Initiative for West Africa, OSIWA, as well as Daria Media, Next Year Advisory, and the Channels TV. We believe that indeed we will all leave this conversation better informed about what the real issues are, what the potential solutions can be, and what individually and collectively we must do to ensure we move Nigeria back to the path of friendship, peace, security, and unity. Indeed, one nation bound in freedom, peace, and unity. Thank you very much, and God bless us all.
At least 8,400 people have died in Nigeria in the last 10 months alone as a result of the many conflicts across the country. This is according to the Council for Foreign Relations, an American-based non-governmental organization. Nigerian security forces appear stretched as they battle Boko Haram terrorists in the northeast, murderous armed men on a killing and kidnapping spree across the northwest and parts of north central, and secessionist militias in the southeast and the southwest.
They will hide guns in planks. All of a sudden, you will hear gunshots. Passerby will suddenly get hit by bullets.
We're living in fear.
Although people live like people under siege.
They don't know whether you are Igbo, you are Hausa, you are Yoruba, anything. You can fall a victim at any particular time.
Of course we had to, because we're fighting. Like Zamfara is a theater center, and this is the control where the army are going to most of these states fighting this bandit, and you had why bandits are running away from Zamfara to the neighboring state. We are fighting them, actually, yeah.
Armed non-state actors across a large chunk of Nigeria are testing the might of the federal government, and they are finding it wanting. The result is a frenzy of serious crimes, terrorism, murder, kidnapping, destruction of people's homes, farms, and large-scale cattle rustling. The situation is dire, and the impact on victims heartbreaking. This is a camp for internally displaced people. Everyone you see here has left their village as a result of the violence that is raging across Zamfara state. There are people here from at least 28 villages in Anka local government of Zamfara state. At least 3,000 households are represented here, although the people who are managing this camp tell us that in the last 2 days, there's been more violence and more killings, leading to more people fleeing their homes. And they've not yet taken account of those that have been displaced. So the numbers are set to rise as well. Predominantly, I'm sure you can see, they're mostly women and children. Not surprising, because they tend to be the most vulnerable anytime you have these sort of conflicts. We are told that this is the largest of 8 camps that exist in Zamfara state, with 6 of them in this particular local government, Anka local government. If you look around, you realize that for a lot of these people, this has essentially become home. You can see that they are fully settled. There are 6 displacement camps in Anchor local government and 2 more that are outside this particular local government. And the troubles show no sign of abating. The state government has generally tried to run a policy that doesn't encourage IDP camps. And so in addition to this aid, there are also a lot of people who have been put with host communities. When I spoke to the Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs, Faika Marshall Ahmed, and asked her why they have this policy of not encouraging IDP camps, she said they were worried about health conditions, they were worried about safety, and they found that it was always much better for the psyche of people who've been displaced if they are placed in host communities.
We provide primary care, and also we provide also maternal health. It's basically antenatal care, postnatal care, and also we provide support to sexual based violence cases, because most of the time when villages are being attacked, we always get cases of rapes.
People are traumatized. The impact has been life-changing, upending people's worlds, leading to death and destruction and the displacement of millions.
Around 9 o'clock or so, a man woke up to us to say he saw some terrorists holding a meeting, and from their conversation, it was obvious they would be attacking us in Koreatown. By sometime around 10:30 in the night, I began to hear sporadic shootings. I instantly began reciting supplications. We ran out of the compound and began to look for safety. Unfortunately, it was already too late. They had spread all over the community, over 400 to 500 terrorists. Some of them rode on the backs of camel, while others were trekking. We witnessed an unprecedented level of destruction.
These people storm our town, kidnap our men, and even kill them. So far, they've killed over 66 people in Tangaza.
As farmers, we need cows to assist us in our farming activities. But as I speak to you, there isn't a single cow in Kucheri, and this has affected our production outputs.
There is violence and chaos in forms of kidnapping and destroying of our farms. There is no one again in the farmlands for fear of being attacked. Everyone has moved to town. There is no food anymore for people to eat. People from Idori, Takpa, and Ayete have all run to town. We have stopped farming.
Suddenly, we heard gunshots and I began to panic. I kept wondering what was about to happen to us in this village. Then, I overheard strange voices from my neighbor's house, Malam Sani. They were shouting at his students to come out. I was convinced that these must be criminals at this point. I lay down and began to pray fervently. They came to my house, and then they started eating at my doors, but they failed to gain access. Unfortunately, they returned to our husband's shops, looted some items, and set the place ablaze. A few minutes later, everything was consumed in flames and smoke. I was confused and traumatized. I asked my 6-year-old son if we could jump into the well for safety, but he said no. After seeing how things were unfolding, he changed his mind and asked us to go. As a mother, I had to find a way to rescue my children, so we all jumped into the well. That was how we didn't die.
Images once only seen on TV are now a reality of Nigeria's conflict-ridden terrains. A once proud people used to working and looking after themselves, now in destitution, forced to eke out a living in very difficult circumstances, and sometimes unwittingly contributing to the environmental problems that are part of the underlying causes of some of the conflicts we see.
I am a cotton farmer and gold trader. I have lost my sources of livelihood as a result of banditry. We now depend on cutting down trees and selling them to earn a living.
Across Nigeria, the impact of these conflicts has been significant. Many can't access their farmlands, and now there are warnings of impending food shortages. Already, food prices have skyrocketed, with the costs more than doubling. The result has been an increase in the number of people living in abject poverty. But the government insists they have a handle on the problem. Recently, the government announced new initiatives to tackle insecurity, including the shutting down of telecoms. The rocks you see looming behind me are Afe Rocks in Afe local government of Zamfara state. This place has become somewhat of a mecca. If you look behind, you will see multiple people, young children, men, women, climbing that rock. And the reason is very simple. The state does not have connectivity. As a result of measures announced by the federal government, all of telecoms were shut down, except in the state capital, Gusau. But what people in this neighborhood and this area have found is that when they actually climb these rocks, they can get connected. Locals have told me that all of the telecom services are available, but you must make your way to the top of the rock. And although many of the people we've spoken to say they understand why the measures were taken, there are many who insist that the state capital should not have been made an exception. And they say informants are among those that are also climbing this rock and still talking to marauders and giving them information on where and how to attack.
The only reason we are climbing this rock is to enable us to call our relatives who have been unable to reach out to us due to the communications blackout.
The ban on telecommunications is not useful to us. Before now, we could easily put across a distress call to Tafe local government whenever we were under attack, and in less than 10 minutes, we would get support. This community has been under attack more than 11 times. But with this lack of communication, they attack us comfortably.
The impact of the conflict on education is also significant and increasingly visible. I'm standing in the premises of Jengebe Girls Secondary School in Anka local government in Zamfara state. Earlier this year, this location was the scene of a very harrowing abduction. Over 270 girls were taken by armed bandits into the bush. They were among the lucky abductees. Why? Because the state government was able to rescue them within 48 hours. There's little doubt that ransom exchanged hands for this rescue to have taken place so very quickly. Unfortunately, the abduction that took place here is not an isolated incident. Across the north, we have seen armed men storm schools and make away with girls and boys of varying ages. And the impact on education has been monumental. It has forced state governments across the north to actually shut down schools. As you can see, this school is also not in session. It is a particularly difficult issue because the North was already disadvantaged when it comes to education. It is estimated that there is an illiteracy rate in these parts that range anything between 70 to 98%, depending on which part of the North you are talking about. With these closures, the expectation is that the educational attainment of this region is going to plummet even further. The victims of insecurity are not just regular folks. Nigerian military personnel and police tasked with providing security in the country are also dying in their confrontations with armed men across Nigeria. Despite the measures being put in place and some of the recently recorded successes against the terrorist Boko Haram group in the northeast, the number of armed non-state actors who are causing mayhem seems to be on the increase, and so too the numbers of their victims, seemingly confirming what experts have always said again and again. Nigeria's conflict cannot be solved with guns alone.
They are delusional. No army has ever defeated underdevelopment and poverty. So a mainly military solution won't solve the problem of insecurity in Nigeria. At best in Nigeria, the police, supported by the army, can help push out or defeat hardcore bandits or extremists. But investment in education, vocational training, job skills, infrastructure, and ending inequality must follow immediately. If not, the problem grows again and again and again, and the security forces and armed forces risk becoming an army of occupation drawn into generations of conflict.
Nigeria is a country at war with itself. Virtually all conflicts in the country are homegrown and driven by local Nigerian actors. Even where we have foreigners like the terrorist group ISWAP making inroads and alliances, or as in the case of the secessionists running rampage in the southeast who receive funding from people abroad, the main drivers of the conflicts we see are locals, homegrown and home-based. Solving Nigeria's security challenges clearly requires multiple strategies that cover military and policing responses, but also tackle the underlying problems which make our communities vulnerable to conflict. Are the answers that obvious? And does the political will exist? Welcome back. This is still Radio Now's Urgent Conversation, coming to you live from Channels Television's Amphitheatre in Lagos. Now, as you heard there, in an effort to deal with the marauding gunmen who are unleashing havoc on the people of Zamfara State, one of the most affected when it comes to insecurity, the government announced drastic measures, which include the closing of some markets and telecom services and restrictions on how and where one can buy fuel. To what extent have these measures been successful? This is part of the conversation I had with the governor of Zamfara State, Dr. Bello Matawalle, in Gusau, the state's capital.
You know, we cannot say 100% because still there is some pocket of some, some things that have been happening in the state. This is something that has been is ongoing for over 10 years. And when I assumed duty as a governor, I tried so many options to make sure that I bring the lasting peace in the state. What I started with is the dialogue and the reconciliation between the farmers and the Fulani. And it yielded a lot of result that time because for the first 1 year, we couldn't record any crisis or any kidnapping or killings. And later on, I have turned up and become, because they have deceived to us, or maybe some of them, because up to tomorrow there are some that have accepted the dialogue and they are still onto it and they are helping our security agencies and they are helping the government. But some of them, they are still unrepentant, so we are fighting those that did not repent and we are still fighting them and we will continue fighting them.
Okay, when you announced your amnesty program, like you said, a whole year of almost peace, what went wrong? At what point did you start to notice that the program was no longer working, and what were the signs?
You know what exactly happened? After we initiated the dialogue, it's supposed to be a collective effort, both the government, the people of the state, and all other political gladiators of the state. But unfortunately, when the government is trying to make sure that we have peace in the state, some political elite are thinking that they don't want us to succeed. So they have been, making so many unprecedented comments about the dialogue issues and the reconciliations. And some of them that has connections with those criminals, they have been telling them all sorts of things so that they shouldn't believe with the government amnesty and reconciliations.
Now, you made what is a very serious allegation in answering that last question, because you seem to imply that there are politicians that have politicized the issue of insecurity in Zamfara. and are playing a role in perpetuating insecurity.
I still maintain that, and I mean it. Because we have some record, we have some, you see, like some of the informants that were arrested, we have over 2,000 informants that are under custody of security, and some of them have made a lot of, comments. Some of them have opened up to the government and the security agency. Some of them, even on their writing of their statement, they indicted so many people, which we are going to talk about that.
What are the specific allegations that they are making?
That some of the politicians are the one funding them, some of the politicians are the one who are giving them targets, some of the politicians are the one calling them that both the state government and federal government are not serious on what we promised to them.
Okay, but already in 2019, when you first came into government, one of the first things you did was to set up a committee led by the former Inspector General of Police, MD Abubakar, a native of Zamfara State. And they came back to you with a comprehensive report which includes some of these things that you're talking about, and they made specific recommendations. Part of that was the naming of previous governors that have been implicated, and there was a suggestion that people should be prosecuted. We haven't seen any prosecution. No white paper has come out of that report, but this is just one of many multiple recommendations that have been made. Are we likely to see you use that report and the findings at all?
Now, it's step by step. Given the
it's been 3 years, sir.
Yeah, given the report, it's not 3 years. Remember, we are now just 2 years.
Yeah.
So, and it was after maybe I have like about 6 to.
It was October
to
2019.
7 months. Yeah, so it's not up to even complete 2 years. You understand? So, but what we did is that we have a commission of inquiry. We have done a white paper, and we have a commission of inquiry where they are working about the report, and immediately after submitting their report, we are going to implement it.
Experts, again, including the report that you commissioned, talk about some of the sort of economic issues that, if you like, contribute, not necessarily at the foundational issues, but contribute to making it difficult. On those particular matters of sort of poverty, lack of education, lack of health care, are you looking to tackle underlying issues or not? Or?
Yeah, of course, because I just got some tribute, Mr. President. We traveled together to ONGA, United Nations General Assembly, and I happened to meet with the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, and I already submitted my proposals and my requests to them, and she is willing to help the state, particularly on the issue of the poverty level of the state and some, investors that can be able to come and invest in the state.
It must be a delicate balancing act, getting investors to come to a place which, by your admission, is facing a bit of insecurity. If you've got 400 people armed attacking communities, how are you performing that balancing act? How do you convince
like the
people?
issue, is over reporting the issue of insecurity. Now you are in Zamfara State for how many days? You travel to Ankara. Is anything happens to you?
No.
Is you
But
travel
by
to
the same token, there are places I want to go to.
It is our people.
No, but
Our people
with all due respect, there are places I want to go to that I've been told I can't go to.
No, but
that's
maybe
number one. And
where?
then,
Like where?
Like Zurmi. Like Shinkafi.
Zurmi, just yesterday, someone called me about 10 o'clock that he is leaving Zurmi to come and he met me around 12 o'clock in my house. So this is over reported. The issue of security. Let me tell you, my sister, it's not Zamfara State only having this issue of insecurity. Now, if you go to Anambra State, how many companies are operating in Anambra State? What is happening in Anambra State? Now you cannot travel to go to Inewi in Anambra State. You understand? Because of the challenges that they have. To a television screen,
people not making about the problems they have? Is that what you are suggesting?
What?
Because I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah.
Because people are getting killed, they're getting kidnapped, homes are getting burnt. I've seen with my own eyes.
The hope that are getting burned.
Yes.
It can happen anywhere.
Is what you are saying. So you're saying
let me tell you. I want to take you to one point. It has been taken some places, like just of recent, what happened to Sabon Birni in Sokoto State? What happened? Do you know what happened in Sabon Birni, where army officers were killed? About 17 army officers were killed in Sabon Birni. Have you ever heard Wamoko the former governor of Sokoto State, making unprecedented comment about what is happening in Sokoto State? He's not. Because he's a good leader, he's a leader. We are not saying that the Zamfara State doesn't have the issue of insecurity. We have. But some of these issues were over-reported.
Some say underreported.
How? It is over-reported. Let me tell you. How many people say they were killed when you went to Korea?
15.
Go and check the newspapers. They say 29 people were killed. Go and check. I saw it when I was in Turkey. That 29 people were killed in Korea. But you as an investigative journalist, you went there by yourself. How many people say? Something 15. Happened. I saw you with Jargaba from DW. I saw you together with him. Ask him. People reported that 40 people were killed in Shinkafi. Ask him. Why he went to Shinkafi by himself? How many people he told you that were killed in Shinkafi? 5 people were killed.
That was the governor of Zamfara State, Dr. Bello Matawalle. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we speak to the men who are charged with providing security for Nigeria. Don't go away.
As you are all aware, our beloved nation, Nigeria, is facing many security challenges at this period. We continue to face security threats and violent crimes such as insurgency, banditry, kidnapping, and politically motivated killings, which threaten our national integration. I assure you that this administration will continue to do everything within the ambit of the law to eliminate all forms of violent crimes that are creating fear and anxiety among the citizenry. It is pertinent to state in this regard that we have received new equipment in our fight against any form of insecurity from our friendly countries. These assets will be deployed to accelerate the fight against insecurity in all parts of the country.
Welcome back to Radio Now's Urgent Conversation, coming to you live from Channels Amphitheatre in Lagos. Now, we are focusing today on insecurity in Nigeria. The military has found itself involved in operations traditionally reserved for the police, mostly because the force appears unable to tackle the security challenges across the country. The Nigerian Air Force is central to the military strategy in the fight against not just terrorists in the northeast, but also other non-state actors across the northwest and the southeast. Air Commodore Edward Gapquet is the spokesman for the Nigerian Air Force. I sat down with him and asked him if he believes the military is winning the fight against Nigeria's many conflicts. My apologies, I understand that there's a problem with that tape, and so we will start with the Chief of Defense Staff, General Leo Irabo.
Well, it all depends on the parameters of assessment. What is important is that within the geographic space itself, that is our country, our country borders, what are the manifestations? To the critical stakeholders, those who have the interest of peace and security in our land, independent assessors, do they share that opinion? If you do a comparative analysis, and that is within the time frame that you have indicated, would that be their assessment? Would that be their judgment?
So what are the sort of things you would be looking at in comparing then and now?
Of course, just earlier on, you alluded to the fact that there are mass defections amongst the terrorists. Those defections didn't just come. It came because there were some focused actions and activities of
and it's not because of infighting between the groups,
well,
which is what the story is out there.
Of course, there are multiplicity of factors, I must tell you, and And of course, the most prominent being the kinetic impact of our operations. Kinetic implying the use of force.
Right.
We are countering force with force. These elements have had to defect. And so it's this defection to superior power that has led to it. We are not going to rest on our oars because we've had such high numbers defecting. But I'm only bringing it out to show that a lot has happened, quite a lot of mileage we have traveled along that path. And so if the Global Terrorism Index assessors do not or tend to discount those efforts, then of course I do not need to blame them. I only am more encouraged by the assessment of those that are within, who of course are part and parcel of the space itself.
Now, some have defected, but we've also seen some move into parts of the Northwest and parts of North Central, places like Niger State, for example, my own state, Zamfara State, increasingly seeing armed conflict by non-state actors that is as vicious as some of what we've seen with Boko Haram, in some cases even more. When you look at the conflict in the Northwest, North Central, and even parts of the Southeast, what are sort of the peculiarities of the issues that the military is dealing with when it comes to these different conflicts across Nigeria?
When you have measures that have been taken to address those threats, the terrorists themselves and the criminal gangs themselves are not fools. There certainly will have to be movement to areas where, of course, if you make an area untenable for them, of course, they'll look for other areas that they
So what does that do for your capacity and that of your people?
And that's the reason why our engagement, our actions, our activities also involve reviews of the threats, and then of course review of the approaches to management of the threats, and then looking at other factors to which the aggregate of all these assessments leads to operational changes, re-strategizing, having to in place measures to cover up gaps that may exist from the assessment that we've done. And so when you see that some of those elements are moving to other parts of the country, namely the Northwest and the parts of the North Central, it's from that point of view. And of course, because we have also factored that, reality, we have also taken measures to ensure that we do not, allow these regions of the country to, get to the stage that we experienced some time ago in the Northeast. And so it's a continuous exercise, a continuous process, and that's why we also believe that, everything that has to do with defense and security is not an end. It's a process. The end itself is peace, the state of peace.
One of the issues that came up when we saw an attack on the Nigerian Defense Academy was you went online and Nigerians were saying, well, if the military cannot defend themselves, how can they defend us? Can you answer that question?
Have we not been under attack? That an attack happened at the Nigerian Defense Academy does not imply that we are not under attack on a daily basis. Do you know how many of the attacks we have had to ward off? The troops on the front lines, the terrorist elements, who are they attacking? Even in the Southeast, which you mentioned, who have they attacked? Police and then military. Now, the attack, very specifically on the Defense Academy, I think I've covered this in the past. It's one of those attacks that is more of, what I could liken to an armed robbery attack of any unsuspecting individual.
So to you, it does not indicate a weakness in the army or in the military?
But in any case, that's the training institution. Now that it's called Nigerian Defense Academy or military academy does not mean that it's not the same as any other school. In our school. Of course, of course, I was embarrassed that we did not, we did not foresee such a threat. I mean, the Nigerian Defense Academy is not a place where we could assume, we could think that we should fortify to such a level that the liberty that's required to be able to embrace, the level of leadership, learning, and skills, we lost. But that, of course, is a lesson we've, factored. And but that does not in any way, dampen the preparedness of the armed forces of Nigeria to do what it should. Now, it does not in any way speak to our weakness and our inability to defend the nation. No, that's not at all.
What do you make of the violence in the Southeast, especially given the fact that we seem to be dealing with a secessionist group that is prepared to take up arms for what they say is self-realization, and the military is present in the Southeast, and there have been allegations, all sorts of allegations, from extrajudicial killings to people even saying that some of the things that are happening are being staged by the military in order to make the indigenous people of Biafra look bad. That is the group that is agitating for secession. What is the sort of military's approach to that particular region and dealing with the violence there? Because I imagine it can't be the same as what you do in Borno and the same as what you do in the Northwest.
Well, the situation in the Southeast, it's not essentially what, the narrative line. No, that's not correct.
Okay.
The situation in the Southeast, of course, there's some level of violence. The military is present, just like any other part of the country. Even before the escalation of violence in the Southeast, the military has always been there. Always had, different formations and establishments of the military in the Southeast part of the country. In fact, there is no part of this country. So when you hear that, the military has increased its presence in the Southeast, I say, no, you're wrong. We have always been there. What you find is that...
So we've not seen more numbers of soldiers being sent there?
No, we even have less number in the sense that a good number of our personnel who we had to move to reinforce, the Northeast, for example, and parts of the Northwest. Of course, they came from somewhere. When they were leaving, there was nobody said, look, why are you moving these soldiers away from here? Currently, of course, there are levels of violence in the Southeast, to which, by our constitutional demands, we should give support to the civil authority, in this case, the police. And that's the reason why we are engaged in different operations in the Southeast and, of course, other parts of the country. All to the good of the citizens.
Do you feel that sometimes people forget that the military are also Nigerians and that they're people?
Of course. I mean, we are all Nigerians as soldiers. And so we wouldn't, of course, in any way take up arms against our kids and kin. It's not possible.
Do you feel
and for
that...
me, take, for example, I mean, I'm sure you know where I come from.
Yes, I do.
So will I have to superintend over those that want to, indiscriminately kill, my subjects? No, it's not possible.
You have a budget of almost 3 trillion naira.
Yeah.
And this is the second highest budget in sub-Saharan Africa, second only to South Africa. Is it sufficient? Is that good for the resources that you need to wage these different campaigns that you are, waging across this country?
Can I tell you that resources certainly cannot be sufficient at any time? Yes, 3 trillion. What is 3 trillion? 3 trillion, of course, for defense. for the 2022 budget, which is good.
Yes.
So what's that figure? May I remind you that in the United States, for example, if you go
But we are not the United States.
I'm just giving you, because you made comparative, you talked about South Africa, and then, of course, ours being third, largest.
Second is the second largest in Sub-Saharan Africa.
In Sub-Saharan Africa. But I'm also letting you know that in 2021, in the U.S., the defense budget was around $705 billion.
Yeah, but the size of the economy is also different from ours.
1 minute. That, of course, translates to about 352 or thereabouts trillion. Now, the point here is, even though 3 trillion appears huge in comparative terms, you must also look at what it can do relative to the challenges that we have. But of course, I must remain very grateful that Mr. President has taken that bold step, and of course the Federal Executive Council, for them to have come to a realization of the fact that we must put security into its proper perspective and then begin to escalate interventions, and then to which that when it's done, everyone will be happy for it, so that, of course, in future, and when things would have normalized, then other sectors of the economy can now begin to take prominence in terms of attention. But I must tell you that is the right step in the right direction. Okay. Even though, of course, we would have loved that, of course, more will be given. But we also know that you can't be asking for what doesn't exist.
The military has, again, to go back to the issue of allegations, especially by organizations like Amnesty International, of, human rights abuses, in some cases with some evidence. Is the Nigerian military adhering to international protocols when it comes to combat? Why do we keep getting these stories of abuses by the military? Sir.
Let me tell you, the Armed Forces of Nigeria is a professional armed force.
Some of the evidence suggests otherwise.
1 minute.
Go on, sir.
We didn't just jump in. We're not a ragtag army, not a ragtag armed forces. The challenge that we face today as a country is a challenge which, in theoretical terms, have been termed asymmetric warfare. This war has many fronts. There are those who are behind the scenes, both internal and external. And so when people come up with narratives, please do not discount.
Are you suggesting that there is another narrative war taking place?
Of course. But we won't be deterred by those shenanigans. So, in some, we're a professional force. We have code of ethics. We have protocols that we follow. We respect human rights, all the international humanitarian laws, and of course, laws of armed conflicts. And besides being taught in our various establishments, they remain part and parcel of our operating protocols.
Do any of your officers face disciplinary actions? Are you able to share some of those with us so people can be reassured that you take, the necessary measures where officers are found wanting?
Across the theaters of operation that we have, there are standing court-martials. Besides, in various formations and units, there are on-the-room procedures, disciplinary procedures that have been in place. And we equally have our, our laws, operating laws, the Armed Forces Act, upon which all these things that we're talking about are well enshrined, and any contravention is dealt with.
Quickly on the regional issues, because I don't think we can talk about Nigerian security without looking at what's going on in Central African Republic, the Sahel, other parts of West Africa. Is it possible for us to secure Nigeria if some of these regions don't see security?
Because threats, criminality, have no respect for borders. And so this is the reason why we have engaged our neighbors, we have engaged in both at the bilateral and multilateral levels, all the countries in the sub-region. They hope that with a collective approach to this challenge, then of course we'll be improving on the situation back home. But of course, the security must be viewed not from just national perspective. It must also, take into consideration what happens within the sub-region and of course the region itself, and even globally.
And since you have that broad picture with all of sort of the engagements that are taking place both regionally but also, internationally, how soon is Nigeria going to sort of return to a situation where people are not getting kidnapped, Boko Haram is defeated, and people can generally feel safe?
Very soon, I would say. But may I remind you?
Soon, as in 2 years, 1 year,
just
6 months?
Just 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
May I remind you that currently Mr. President is in Glasgow. But the whole world leaders, they're in Glasgow. What has taken them there? That faces the world. Nigeria is within that global world, global environment. And so manifestations that you find in our shores, violent in nature, must also be linked to the global threat profile. But that it's not to mean that we will not escalate actions to be able to address them. With what we're doing, I can assure you, and of course by extension the populace, that a lot of relief, reprieve, come.
That was General Irabo, the Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, assessing the performance of the armed forces in curtailing insecurity. Now, the Nigerian Air Force is another central plank in the fight against insecurity across Nigeria. To find out how they are doing and how they perceive the fight, I spoke to Air Commodore Edward Gapquet. He's the spokesman for the Nigerian Air Force. And I started by asking him if he believes the military is winning the fight against Nigeria's many insurgencies. The 2019 Global Terrorism Index, which is sort of a respected way of measuring terrorism across the globe, says Nigeria is the third most dangerous country for terrorism. And that has seen no improvement since 2017, suggesting that your assessment that you're winning the war is not acceptable by people who measure these things.
I can't question what yardstick they used to arrive at this kind of a conclusion, but I can tell you I'm on ground here.
So what is the yardstick you are using to conclude that you are winning the war? Tell us.
Once we are able to get our people back to their homes, once people are being able to get back to their farms, once children are being able to go back to their schools, those are signs to tell you that, yes, there are some measures of successes that have been measured. Have been achieved in this war against all forms of criminality in this country. That is what we used to measure, not somebody sitting down elsewhere in another country and going on the internet and drawing up figures. No.
But
we
these
wouldn't
measures
allow
that you talk about, I
Yeah.
mean, I've just come back as part of putting this program together from a tour of my state, which is Zamfara. And I can assure you that people are not back in their farms.
Well, I
Schools
can
are
also
still
assure you
closed.
that only recently the UNDP rep made a very, very firm statement in the Northeast where it commended the armed forces and the governor of
So the fight against
Borno.
Boko Haram
No,
is
hold
being
on. Hold on. I can assure you that they've commended the armed forces and the government of Borno State that a lot of people have been able to go back to their settlements. That's not a small feat. Just some few days ago, the spokesperson of the Kaduna State government came on board and stated that over 50 bandits were killed, in operations, coordinated operations between the Army, Navy, and even the Air Force. So a lot has been done. About 3 weeks ago, too, we have seen where, In Kankara local government, about 34 bandits were eliminated. So a lot of efforts are being put in place.
So if a lot of work is being done and you are recording successes, like you've listed, and we still have, large swathes of this country facing insecurity, does that not speak to the sort of the scale of the problem and how bad it is? Would that be right in saying we seem to be at war across this country, not just in the Northeast?
I think you seem to, from your question, obviously you seem to think the armed forces is the only solution to some of these problems.
No. I am speaking to a member of the armed forces, so I assume you cannot talk about things outside.
Thank you. I'm happy you know that.
So that's why my questions are limited to what the armed forces are doing.
To this security situation is very, very obvious. Everybody has to be involved. Members of the media themselves too have to begin to realize that they are part and parcel of the solution to this problem. You understand? It's only when we begin to realize that we will know that it goes beyond kinetic operations in themselves. So I don't think you just don't look at the armed forces and believe that yes, these are the people that will finally solve this problem for us and will move forward.
20 officers dead, 4 crashes, within sort of 6 months or so is quite a high number. Are there issues around maintenance of aircraft and training of personnel, in addition to the threats from...
When you are fighting an insurgency, like the one we are facing right now, the tendency is that your air operations are increased. You fly more. When you fly more and you train more, there is likelihood of what we call likely accidents. That could have been
go up
of course.
On the volume of
yes,
what you're doing,
it's normal everywhere, even in developed countries. Even in developed countries, you can go and find out. The U.S. is not fighting any war at the moment on its land. Find out how many plane crashes they have in a year. In fact, between 2013 to 2018, the United States of America, that you know, not fighting a war between these 5 years, have had an average of 27 military crashes per annum, 2013 to 2017.
But they have more planes than you.
It doesn't matter, but they are not fighting the war. That's the issue. Are they fighting the war in the U.S.? They're not. Training, weather, so many things can come into play when you are in this kind of operations. I'm not giving an excuse that, okay, so because we are fighting insurgency, then we'll be having crashes. But these things are likely to happen. We are not happy about it. But when you are in the air, most of the time, sometimes these things happen.
Now, obviously, our understanding of the armed forces is they sort of help protect the territorial integrity of Nigeria. We found a situation where the police have been overwhelmed by some of the challenges that they face, and so we've had the army and other parts of the armed forces deployed to deal with, problems that are internal. I know you are in the Northeast fighting Boko Haram. I know that you are in the Northwest fighting the people they call bandits, and parts of, I don't know, North. So where else is the Air Force deployed? Are you at all in the East? Because, we hear rumors of, things being done to secessionists or people who are sort of causing trouble in the Southeast. Can you confirm where and where you are operating?
The Nigerian Air Force is operating in all joint operations in this country. In the Northeast, we are in Operation Hadinkai. In the Northwest, Operation Hadarin Daji. In the Southwest, Operation Awasi. In the South-South, Operation Delta Safe. We're also providing close air support to our troops in the Southeast and all over the country. Wherever there is a joint operations ongoing, the Nigerian Air Force is fully engaged there.
So given the scale of the issue in the Northeast, where we're dealing with a full terrorist army and been doing that for 10 years. There's kind of adequate understanding, I think, in the minds of Nigerians about, you know, what sort of operations you'll be doing there. The same thing with the, you know, Northwest. We're not quite clear what you're doing in the Southeast, given that what we're dealing with is a group that is looking for independence and is not so much an army, you know, and they don't seem to sort of be as dangerous, if you like. At least that's our perception, as the people in the Northeast and the people in the Northwest. So what is the Air Force doing dealing with essentially people who are saying we don't want to be part of Nigeria, give us our own country?
Like I've told you before, once there's a joint operations, you have all the services involved there, and we can't be left behind. We have to give support to our ground troops.
You don't think it's an overkill?
And, we are just supporting ground troops, and that is what makes the difference with what we are seeing today in the armed forces. We are all working together.
So, I mean, overall, your outlook seems to be upbeat about your ability as the Air Force to contribute to securing Nigeria and making it safer. But sort of given the sort of major issues that we see across this country, I want to try and put you on the spot and ask you whether you can give a timeline based on being a professional and used to sort of fighting when Nigerians can expect to be able to fully go back to their farms, to their schools and all of that. What sort of, I mean, when we started with Boko Haram, it was now 10, 12 years ago. Are we going to be still having this conversation in another 10 years? Or are you hopeful that
I'm very confident that with, like I've told you, where we started with the kind of, the level of cooperation we have seen that these service chiefs have brought to bear, you know, and of course with the fact that we've been receiving new platforms and the fact that the morale of our troops are high up there, I tell you, I assure you, and I assure Nigerians that, you know, it's just a matter of time before things begin to go back to normal. All we are looking for, all we are begging for, is for Nigerians, aside being patient, which they have exhibited over time, is the fact that, please, you know, this war we're fighting can only be achieved if we all join hands together. Please, in terms of providing that information that we require, you know, in terms of support for the armed forces. And when I say support, I'm talking about, you know, avoiding spreading rumors, fake news that will dampen or that could dampen the morale of our troops out there, you know. I've seen how other countries treat their armed forces. The armed forces that are far less, you know, combatant or sophisticated like the Nigerian armed forces. You know, let's get a little of that. Let's get that support that other countries give to their armed forces. And I assure you, when we put our hands together in all of these places, it's just a matter of time before. Because for the enemy, you know, we tend to underestimate the enemy himself because he is also, you know, using the media, using localities and all of that to win hearts and minds. He's also doing the same thing. But if he sees that we are united against it, I tell you, you will see some of them begin to come out and even surrender. And that's what we're even seeing in the Northeast. The surrendering is not necessarily an infight between the terrorists. It's the fact that they have seen that Nigerians are beginning to unite, you know, behind the armed forces. And of course, with the firepower that the Air Force and other agencies have brought to bear in that entire operation itself.
Thank you very much for your time. That was the spokesman for the Air Force, Air Commodore Edward Gabquet. It's time for another short break. When we return, our panel of experts here with us in the studio will examine everything we've seen and heard so far. There's more to come. Don't go away. Welcome back. You are watching Radio Now's Urgent Conversation, and we are discussing this issue of insecurity in Nigeria. And I'm now joined in the studio by a panel who will look at all of the things that we've been talking about in the last 1 year. Mosum Pretty, Ms. Palmer, Daniel Bwala, a security and policing expert, Rotimi Sankore, developmental journalist, and Kabir Adamu, a conflict and security expert, join me in the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Right, thank you for. If I could actually start with you, Kabir, and I hope it's okay if I call you all by your first names. That's fine. Okay. Could I start by asking you if Nigeria has an insecurity problem, or whether what we actually have is a governance problem, in your view?
In my honest view, it's a combination of both. Now, what is the drivers of insecurity? Those drivers are governance challenges, and I can quickly mention them. In your report, you identified them: poverty, unemployment, inability to manage the consequences of climate change, environmental challenges, our weak criminal justice system that is failing to punish, arrest and punish offenders, weapons proliferation. All these are elements of bad governance. And so there is a positive correlation between bad governance and insecurity.
And Mr. Sankore, based on what he has said, I mean, if you look at sort of the different conflicts going on in Nigeria now, whether it's terrorism in the northeast, whether it is the so-called bandits in the northwest, and even the secessionist movements that are suspected to be sort of the armed unknown gunmen in the southeast, it seems each conflict is peculiar because of the way it is sort of manifesting. But based on what he's saying, it seems as if there is a link between all of them. Is there a link or not, in your view?
There's a link. The common thread is that it's developmental, and some are worse than others, because the foot soldiers are being produced by underdevelopment. And in some areas, it's more clearly so. So in the northeast and the northwest, you mentioned earlier in the documentary about the level of illiteracy. If you have 60 million people in the country that are unable to read and write, that's the figure from the Minister of Education. You have 13 million kids out of school, and you have high levels of inequality, especially gender inequality, which is essentially forcing young girls to reproduce foot soldiers. I mean, that's essentially what it is. When you force girls...
Sometimes when we talk about gender equity, you get allegations of you feminists. And, you know, these are foreign ideas. Women, you know, should sort of know their place. We are Africans and all of that. You're saying there's an important reason why gender equity matters.
Absolutely. You can't have a situation in which millions of young girls between 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old are being forced into something described as marriage and being forced to reproduce at the rate of 7 to 12 children per girl. And if you multiply by polygamy, that's 12, 14, 28, 32 children per man. And then those kids don't have access to education. And then they are in hunger and malnutrition, and many of them are in large ungoverned spaces. That's an army being reproduced for bandits and extremists. So gender equality is important in its own right, but it also has positive developmental consequences.
Let me see if I can bring Mr. Daniel in here. When you hear Rotimi talk about gender equity, and we know that depending on which part of the country you are, some of these issues, the problems with gender equity can sort of tilt a little bit. So early marriage, more often in one part of Nigeria, not as often in other parts of Nigeria. And so if you look at, say, the problem in the southeast, for example, how is the problem of governance manifesting, you think, in the secessionist agitation that we see?
Right. Well, he is right. And then to directly answer your question, I look at it from the constitutional standpoint. if you look at section 14 of the Constitution, the very concept of democracy, when you find it not, having its course in the country, that is the non-existence of the principles as enshrined in the Constitution is the foundation for the problem. So like subsection 14 subsection 1, it says, the Federal Republic of Nigeria shall be a state based on the principles of democracy and social justice. The part is talking about has to do with social justice. When people cannot have access, equal access to education, equal access to political participation. So even when you talk about the youth restiveness, you talk about the NSAS concept, is because there is a loss of confidence in government. The youth no longer believe that the way the system is framed, they can actualize their dreams of not just getting a degree and getting educated, but being a part of the governance process. And when you look at the concept of democracy as enshrined now, democracy is an idea of a government of popular participation. That is the majority rule by election, electing leaders by popular vote, and the rights of the minorities are protected. So the question we have to ask ourselves, and which I believe the absence of the answer is the reason for the problem we are seeing, is that people no longer have confidence in the election process in Nigeria. So when leaders emerge, it is naturally believed they emerge out of so many other variables other than the very essence of the principles of democracy. So from 1999, politicians started the breeding of these terrorist activities through, of course, the talks, ballot stuffing, some of these activities that are inimical to democratic values. So the leader now emerges as a result of the instrument of violence. So we have now come to the point in the country where we are facing what we call crisis economy. The biggest economy in Nigeria now is formulation and promotion of crisis. You get paid to create crisis. You get paid to advise on crisis. You get paid to provide solution for crisis, and you get paid to solve the problem, and then paid again to create another one.
We happen to have someone who is a bit of an expert when it comes to sort of the economy. And when you hear someone like Daniel talk about the economy of crisis, from the perspective of some of the work that you're doing, what is the sort of immediate and also like medium-term impact of all of the conflict that we have? What have you been able to see and measure?
So what I see on a daily basis is that the negative impact of all of these outcomes directly affects livelihoods of individuals, citizens in the country. And in the medium to long term, it's beginning to affect even the way we deal and relate with each other. So we talk about all of the problems around governance, around inequality, but then when you look at individuals, we no longer have the trust issues have been broken between citizens and government. But when it now comes to generating income, everyone is scampering and fighting for self. So where there's no focus on the collective good any longer. There's a big, I do not want to say agitation, but there's a lot more pressure for each one for survival, individual survival. And that is creating another menace that if we do not manage real time, is going to blow up in our faces.
Now, Madam Kabiri, she said something interesting there about the individualization that has sort of crept into our communities, but even in the way that this conflict is discussed. I mean, we sit here and we talk, and people, experts like yourself, like Mr. Sankore, cannot understand the drivers and can see the similarities to what is happening across multiple parts of Nigeria. And yet somehow, in the way that the conflicts are presented, they're almost presented like they are very different, very distinct, but more importantly, they also pitch Nigerian against Nigerian, and some sort of identity politics creeps into even the analysis of politics. Are you surprised by this?
Unfortunately, no. I'm worried about it, but not surprised, in the sense that politicians, unfortunately, are using that to achieve their objectives.
Which, in your view, is what exactly?
Well, governorship as rulership. He has described what he calls the crisis, economy.
Now, if you use identity, and in some instances the lack of it, to achieve an objective, what you have done effectively is to create divisions that in the long run you hope to benefit from. And
to
now,
exploit, is what you said.
exploit.
Right.
Now, my worry is the influence units within society are the medium to achieve this by politicians. So the media is an example, unfortunately. And I've been so worried about this because I sometimes ask myself, the media, phase or front, are they conscious of the consequences of this, or are they just being used as medium to achieve those objectives? When you use identity to describe a security challenge, are you consciously doing that, knowing very well that that identity would at a point even come back to affect you? So that, I think, is a huge challenge. Again, the politician, unfortunately, is likely to be the victim of this challenge. Is he also conscious of the consequence of that? Let's remember that the biggest group, as it were, when you speak of politicians that are benefiting from the political system, is the legislature. And if there is a change of government, that is the first arm of government that is affected, usually. So I see it as a cycle. And there are participants that are conscious, and then there are other participants, unfortunately, that are not conscious of this. It comes back again to the influence units within society.
Okay, let me quickly bring you, Mr. Rotimi here. I mean, we've had this conversation, I think you and I, in different forms. If we're not the conversation we're having is not rocket science. It kind of seems so obvious to you and to me. Why do you think those that are in charge of sort of policy are not making the connections between some of what they're doing and the problem that we're having? Or is it in your view that they just don't care? And do they not understand that in many ways, like Kabir said, they're digging their own grave?
Well, some don't care, some don't understand, and some don't want to indict themselves. But overall, the understanding of security by the Nigerian political elite is wrong. The more developed any society is, the more stable it is. And by the reverse, the more underdeveloped any society is, the more unstable it is. So that's essentially what the problem is. You can summarize it in 2 sentences. You were talking about scale of the problem with one of the military officers that you interviewed in the documentary. The scale of the problem really needs to be understood. The Minister of Education tells us there are 60 million adults unable to read or write. What is the plan for the 2 million classrooms or vocational classrooms for them, and the 2 million teachers or instructors for them, that we need to be able to ensure that these people then have the skills to be able to develop themselves? They are not telling us that. The person that should be at the center, or the people that should be at the center of all this, is not just the president, the Minister of Planning, the commissioners of planning, the minister and commissioners of youth, development, education, gender. They are completely absent from the entire conversation. Instead, army generals are being asked to solve a problem that essentially they didn't create. So, this is where a big part of the problem comes from.
And I think that, to take from your point, I feel that the democracy in reality in Nigeria is the democracy of problems created by politicians, and then you bring in the law enforcement that are obviously unprepared and ill-equipped to solve the problem. And when they are unable to solve the problem, then the masses now turn the heat on the law enforcement. So at the end of the day, you discover that we go through the same cyclical effect, but in actual fact, policy is the foundation for solution in every given society. And sometimes it is intriguing when you hear governors, in public fora, when they are talking about governance and things like that. They begin to give step A, B, and C, and 1, 2, 3 to the solution. But If you rewind, they asked to be elected to provide solution.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you to just hold that thought. We will, delve a little bit further, but I do have people joining us via Zoom, and I'd like to introduce them. Professor Nwanko Uchenna Martins is a professor of globalization, terrorism, and integration at Imo State University. He will be joining us. So too will be Indi Kato. She runs an NGO. She runs an NGO and will be also joining us, as will be Osita Chidoka, the founder of Unlock Nigeria. If I could actually start with Indi, if she can hear me properly.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Hi, Indi. Okay, so we've been talking about the issue of insecurity in Nigeria and looking at some of the underlying issues that seem to define some of the problems we see, regardless of region. What is your take regarding some of the issues? And I know you've been particularly involved in areas that have been particularly hard hit, Southern Kaduna, for example, by violence, bloodletting, and a lot of killings.
So someone has mentioned there, and I really want to key into that conversation on the fact that key development indices show that we're falling far behind. And you cannot talk of security and then keep leaving these indices the way they are. Poverty is the main issue. When I went to University of Abuja during the attack, or after the attack that happened in University of Abuja, the lecturers pointed out that these new attackers were very young boys. They are well armed, they are very young, and this is what they have set out to do. And you could tell that, look, these group of boys, you can't tie them to anything beyond the fact that this has become more lucrative than being a normal Nigerian. This has become more of a payday than being just, going on your normal day as a Nigerian. So what we are seeing at the end of the day is that, look, poverty is an issue. The Nigerian state also does not reward good behavior. We're now used to cutting corners, and everybody's doing what they can to survive. Of course, it's not to make an excuse for banditry or any form of terrorism, but we have to look at where we are. Increased poverty, especially in northern Nigeria, is a problem. Even in the southeast, even in places where we're saying that, oh, there was some form of, higher indices, better indices than other parts of the country, we're seeing a drop. We're seeing a key drop in that. And people are idle, no occupations. People are slipping more into poverty. People are going to consider this. With respect to the group of boys, the class of boys, which lecturers said, look, they were close to 50 or over 50. 50 was the number that lecturers kept saying from University of Abuja that they attacked. I went out the next day, and I was looking at the number of young northern boys who are living in squalor, even in Abuja with us here. And I can only point, well, if somebody comes to these boys and tells them, look, I will give you an RPG, and by the next day or by the next week, you'll be holding 300 million naira in your hand by taking one human being. I mean, that is enough. If you also tell a poor person in Nigeria today, 100,000 if you serve as an informant, that is enough. So one of the key things, especially from the development angle for me, will be that, look, we have to look at poverty. We have to look at poverty.
Thank you very much, Indi. Thank you, Indi. I mean, some of the issues she raises, some of the statistics are pretty frightening, if I could speak to you. 33.3% unemployment, 22.8% underemployment, 42.5% youth unemployment. That's like almost half of the population of our young people. And then you add that to the fact that it is estimated that there are between 10 to 13, out-of-school children. The statistics are really quite grim when you look at them. And my issue is, for example, is one of those, the chicken and the egg situation. We've got to a stage where they are fueling insecurity. So what comes first? Do you secure first and then build these things? Or do you build these things, and how can you build when you have this level of insecurity?
Thank you very much for that question, because the challenge is that we've always done things in isolation. I like his reference. You get the Minister of Education to fix education in isolation, and you want to get the Minister of Health to fix health in isolation. You cannot do one without the other. We must look for solutions and run them concurrently, because we have already created a messy situation. And to fix it, it's a hydra-headed monster, and you've got to deal with it in the same fashion. We've got to prefer solutions towards education and literacy. We also need to prefer solution towards civic education. People, look, the average Nigerian has almost lost a sense of worth. The average Nigerian on the street is fighting for survival. And it is so, it's grimmer than grim. If you employ today, if you run interviews and you want to recruit young persons for particular profession, operations. I run a retail business. One of my investments is in retail. And you cannot find skilled manpower to man regular tills. You as a business owner need to further invest in training and building their capacity.
There's an irony in that, isn't it? Because we've got a lot of people without work.
Absolutely.
And yet no skills.
And then, but you have more people out of work without the requisite skills that the market requires today. Okay. So you're spending more time as an investor and business owner trying to build people's capacity to fit the work that you have available. And that's in a formal situation. But let me backtrack a bit into the rural sector where I work also as a farmer. All right? I cannot find an average young person that can maintain or drive a tractor in a rural setting today because it is not attractive. It is not the kind of job work that people aspire to, but you have all of those.
You can't put it on Instagram.
You can put it, you can actually put it on Instagram.
Okay.
I drive tractors. It is cool. It is, well, for lack of a better expression, sexy and, you know, chic to actually get on a tractor today and say I'm a female tractor operator. However, society has shaped the orientation of the average young person in Nigeria to think lawyer, doctor, and today politician and legislator.
Okay. I want
and
to bring in
messing with the reality of what
I'd like to bring in Professor Nwanko in here, Uchenna Martins, to ask him, Prof, I assume you've been listening very, very intently to this conversation. I'd like your take on some of the issues that we've been talking about, but in particular, I also want you to have a go at telling us what you think of the conversations we had earlier, particularly with the military chiefs and their assessment of security or insecurity in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have to state this. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Prof. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Insecurity is a very serious problem in Nigeria. I have to understand from the point of the people discussing about it now. See, we have to understand that our problem here is poverty and unemployment. And the way it is, the government is not doing anything positive towards handling these two major issues. We have to see from this dimension. The person they have just mentioned about driving tractors, we have to also understand that the educational system is not functional enough the way it should be. University is not for everybody. There must be vocational schools to encourage basic employment. For instance, they further had what we call vocational schools, where you have people that are trained for driving, for shoemaking, electricity, other handworks. But these days, there are no more. University is not for everybody. University is not for everybody.
So what I'm hearing you say, Prof, is that a strategy to deal with insecurity must include us looking at what people who can't do academic stuff are able to do, and there are quite a few of them.
Yes. The major way to control or avert
Oh, Prof, your video, somehow you've ended up switching off your video. Could you please put it on again?
Okay.
Your video is off. Your video is off. It's off. Okay, it's back on. It's back on. Yes, so carry on, please.
Okay. So we must understand that the youths must be kept busy. The youths are not working. If the youths are working, insecurity can be controlled. Unemployment is there, poverty is there, and once there's poverty and there is unemployment, there must be greed. So insecurity is coupled with greed. And once youths are put on a tentative job, not a job that make them today start jumping upside and down to get something going on their own. Now, we can now say this. Graduates in university for 4 years, no jobs. Working on the streets, no jobs, no food. They have an alternative, which is crime. And crime leads to insecurity. Now, the best way to solve this now is employ what we call massive youth employment strategies. Push the youths into agriculture. Push them into mechanics. They must not work where they put ties all the day. So they talk about...
And I hear what Prof is saying, Rotimi. I want to bring you in here. It's easy to sort of sit in a room and say, get youths to farm. The farms now, even those who farm can't harvest because of insecurity. And so sometimes I wonder whether we are involved in a really circular argument, right? And for places, for example, in the Northwest where I come from, there's also another major problem, which this one we can kind of, you know, duck out of blaming ourselves for, and that's climate change. So we've seen the environment shift. In the Northeast, the Lake Chad has shrunk tremendously. A lot of people think there's a direct correlation between that and the rise of Boko Haram. And the parts of the Northwest now, we're also beginning to see the sort of huge impact of climate change with environments that used to be able to produce food not being able to do so. So if you kind of take this circular thing that I'm talking about, and also the fact that we're dealing with factors that are not within our control, in reality, what are our options?
Well, climate change may not have been understood fully 20 or 30 years ago, or even 40 years ago, which is part of the problem. But it also tells us something, that there are some people that have no business in governance. At the time climate change started to hit the Northeast first, and to a lesser extent, the Northwest, we had military governors and a military government.
Including the current president?
Yes, the current president was the military administrator for Northeast Nigeria, and then the first military governor of Borno State. This was in the 70s. Now, infantry and artillery officers are not trained to understand climate change. It's not their skill set. So you can see how we missed the boat to start with. But even by the late 90s, 1999, 2000, when civilians, led by President Obasanjo, were returning to power, there was still not a clear understanding that the response to climate change must include a lot of development investment to mitigate it. And failure to mitigate it is what has caused a lot of the problems now. And the response now must then be as such.
So, Malam Kabir, when we hear the people like General Irabo, for example, and the spokesman for the Air Force talk about all the work that they're doing, are you at all expecting that what they do in itself will be enough to secure Nigeria?
No, and I think we've made it very clear here that they've been asked to address issues that they are making. Most of what we see that have resulted in military deployments are symptoms of the structural issues within our polity that have resulted in insecurity. And frankly, no law enforcement or defense or security agency can address that. Rather, it's the government as a whole. And in speaking around that, and which is a point I would like to, for lack of a better word, correct. Government has platforms for addressing some of these things. But I think if for us to reach some form of conclusion in what we are discussing, perhaps we need to ask, why are those platforms not effective? So you have a Ministry of Budget and Planning that coordinates the activities of all the several government. When President Buhari came, he told us of the 3 priorities that he wanted to address. One of them is insecurity. And I can tell you, every time a ministry submits a budget, it is supposed to have parameters within that budget for addressing the issue of insecurity. So when, for instance, earlier on, he mentioned and she mentioned mentioned that there is no form of coordination within government. I have a contrary view to that. That ministry looks at that budget.
So
and
what is the problem if there is coordination?
No, I'm not saying there is coordination. I'm
Right.
saying that we need to enhance coordination.
Right.
And not just, we need to answer the key question, what is governance? Are we speaking about the federal government addressing, for instance, the unemployment challenge, when we know, for instance, that President Buhari has promised certain jobs of certain numbers for every year? Is it a responsibility that the federal government alone should be doing, or should there be a combination of effort between the federal and
get
state
Daniel to try and
state
answer some of
government?
those questions from his perspective.
No doubt there are government policies that are, geared towards that, but whether they are effective is one thing. I look at it again from the perspective, because you see, insecurity is one large concept, but so many things are on the line. And now we're faced up with a problem where, even as we talk about non-kinetic approach, we must think of the kinetic approach to do. Because that's actually the moving concept in the country. You heard him talked about the amount that was budgeted for the military, and he told you it's small. Now, when you hear trillion, the immediate thing that comes to the mind of an average Nigerian is it's too much. But the equipment they will buy is in dollars. And by the time you convert the monies into dollars, you see we actually do not have the money. Ordinarily, in every police formation, when I'm talking about not division, but regional, they are supposed to have fully equipped surveillance helicopter. We are supposed to have, we have commercial drones. Why are security forces not having those drones?
So you are enamored of military options or military solutions. I will ask you that question again when we come back from a break. Okay? We'll start for a quick break. And when we come back, we'll begin to engage with members of our audience. Don't go away. Welcome back. You are watching Radio Now's Urgent Conversation, and we're talking about insecurity. I'd like us to quickly get to the issue of solutions now. And if we could start maybe by engaging a few people in the audience. There's a mic over there. Anybody who wants to sort of make a comment, if you make your way there, say who you are. And please keep it as brief as possible. We're fast running out of time.
My name is Nelson Ekujumi. I listened to one of your panelists talked about the youths not being able to actualize their dreams. And I asked, what can a youth without formal and informal education dream about? Also, we have come here and we have all acknowledged that there's the need for the non-kinetic approach. And for me, the problem starts with the erosion of our values. As a young man, I was brought up with the mindset that only truth, hard work, and honesty can make you. Our youths wake up in the morning, they are dreaming of building a 21-story building without any means of livelihood.
Okay.
And that is why we are where we are today.
Thank you very much, sir. Anybody else in the audience who wants to say a few words? Yes, ma'am. As quickly as possible, please. Thank you.
Well, Bukifemi Ajala is the name.
Your name, please.
Bukifemi Ajala.
Okay.
Is it loud?
Yes,
I think I'm
we can
loud.
hear you.
Bukifemi Ajala is the name. And I like to say I hold the office of the citizen of Nigeria. So, in solving this problem, because you have actually analyzed everything, and I think I want to start with this book by Jim Collins, Good to Great. Before we talk about policies, structures, and all that, the first thing is who is driving the bus? The first speaker mentioned about values. Who is this person driving the bus? And the people that are driving the bus, what are their values? Many a times, they will call what is white to us, they will say it's gray. So you begin to wonder that, am I the one that is mad? You know, why is it that we haven't gotten to the point where we would be sincere to ourselves? Until we get to that point, we will not move.
I get a little bit concerned when conversations start talking about intangibles like values. You know what I mean? Not because they don't matter, but because often in sort of wanting to talk about solutions, real things that can be done, values seem like very intangible things. And I know that, for example, where I come from, my mom, for example, her way of passing value to us when we were kids was through education, right? And so from the point of view of those practical things that can be done, this is what I'm really looking for. I don't want us to leave this program without sort of holding something. So feel free to jump in, panel, and sort of give me those things to hold on to that people watching, including policymakers, can say, you know what, these people make sense. Maybe we can do this.
Can I? Okay.
Yeah,
You go.
You start. Let's start with you.
I have a reason for wanting to listen to you,
okay.
And then I will speak right after you.
Thank you. So we've got a revised national security strategy that was passed in 2019. And virtually everything we've discussed there is contained in that document. When that document was passed, the first thing I asked is...
When you say passed, you mean by...
The president launched it.
Okay, assented to by the president.
He launched it,
okay.
And the Office of the National Security Advisor is the custodian of that document. The first question that came to my mind after reading that document is, where is the implementation strategy? Now, almost 2 years down the road, that document is yet to be implemented. So we've got the answer. And in speaking about value, I don't think it's intangible. I think it's a credible solution that we need to address. There are four institutions.
So when I say it's intangible, what I mean is in terms of you don't sit down in the house and say, come, let me give you value. You know what I mean? There have to be like a process for realizing.
That's what I'm going to talk about. There are about 4 places that we could discuss values, starting from the family. You give birth to children. What is your responsibility as a parent to that child? Are we meeting up with that responsibility? And then we need to address narratives that are counterproductive. When you sit and criticize a certain part of the country without understanding the issues that have led to where they are, it's counterproductive. Second point is our religious institutions. They shape our values. Where are we today with regards to their role in shaping our value? Then our educational institutions. She just mentioned that graduates are produced and they are unable to meet the objectives of the certificate they are holding. And then lastly, the media. All of these 4 institutions have a role, and I think in addressing value systems, we need to look at their
Because
role.
I know he's sort of really good with data. I'm going to sort of jump to him because, when we talk about, for example, things starting with the family, you've got almost what? How many children in IDP camps in the Northeast that don't have parents at all, that are susceptible? What's the number again, Rotimi? So when you sort of look at how much we've sort of literally collapsed, because I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say that the situation we're in is, looks really, really bad. How do you start? Where do you begin to sort of do these things? If you talk about education, it goes back to governance, right? If you talk about parenting, it goes back to whether the parents are able, because there's a lot of poverty, that sort of thing. Rotimi, from your point of view, where would that be, the starting point?
Okay, so I always say to people that states collapse community by community. So in the case of Nigeria, that would be communities in local governments and within the 36 states. Because the local governments and the state governments have failed miserably in one of their primary goals, which, for instance, is to build primary schools. So if you have a birth rate of X today, and primary schools you have can only cater for maybe 40% of that, in 5 or 6 years' time, when those kids are to start school, you will have out-of-school children proportional to that.
And there's a piece of data that I think suggests that 70% of Nigerian children who start primary school
don't go to secondary school. Yes. So it is those failures point by point that accumulate this problem. Depending on birth rate, demographic distribution, and so forth, it takes anything from 18 to 25 years to have the kind of problem we have now. The numbers of out-of-school children, 60 million that can't read and write, the numbers susceptible to banditry and extremism and so forth like that. So that's how this problem has accumulated. You mentioned IDP camps. That's a potential problem. So Senator Ndume told us once that there are 60,000 orphans in the Borno IDP camps. And no one came and said, those 60,000 orphans need education. That's gold dust for extremists. That is absolute, because 60,000 orphans with no access to education, if they grow up, if only half of them are recruited by bandits or extremists, that's the equivalent of at least a few divisions.
Okay, I want to bring in Daniel, because I noticed his reference to the Constitution, for example. And because we're dealing with structural issues, there are people who believe part of the problem is the way we are governed. And that if we could find a way to bring governance a bit closer to people, and if what people call true federalism or restructuring, I mean, different people use different languages, that perhaps that could begin us on the journey to begin to tackle some of these issues that are allowing our communities to be vulnerable to conflict. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. And as a member of the consultants, as part of the consultants to the Constitutional Review Committee, I can tell you that we have made far-reaching recommendations for constitutional amendments that will bring these deliverables to the people, one of which is the creation of state police. But assuming that the federal government wants to control the police from the federal point of view, we need, on an average, to recruit about 5 million police officers in the country. A country of over 200 million population with a police personnel of less than 400,000 is a disaster. A country of over 200 million population with the army personnel of less than 500,000 is also a disaster.
I'm going to have to interrupt you quickly to give her a few minutes to say a few final words, because we've run out of time.
So we're not bereft of ideas or solutions. We have loads and loads of white papers, recommendations, policy drafts in the offering. What we lack right now is a pragmatic and fearless leader across board, federal, state, and local government level, to drive execution of all the recommendations that have been made.
Mosum Pretty, Ms. Palmer, Daniel Bwala, Rotimi Sankore, Kabir Adamu, Professor Nwanko Uchenna Martins, Indikato, and the studio audience, thank you so much for joining us on Urgent Conversations. Join us again for another edition, which we'll announce very soon. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.